Chapter 1, The Cracks Begin. Ethan would always say that the best part of his day was Ben's laughter. That soft, high-pitched giggle as he recounted his day or tried to tell a silly story, filled the house with warmth. For Ethan, every moment he spent with his son felt like a gift, a small miracle wrapped in innocence and wonder. From the beginning, Ethan and Sarah had seemed happy. They married young, and for the first few years, they found joy in each other's company. But over time, little things started to build up, disagreements about work, house responsibilities, and life in general began to creep in, slowly at first, then more aggressively. They both felt the pressure but rarely acknowledged it. Ben, in his quiet innocence, didn't notice. He was still the light of Ethan's life, the anchor that kept him grounded. Yet, as the months passed, the arguments grew. Ethan wanted things to work. He wanted to hold on to the love he once had for Sarah, for the sake of their family. He knew how deeply he loved his son and how desperately he wanted a stable home for him. One evening, after yet another argument that left Ethan exhausted and Sarah silent, Ethan found Ben drawing in the living room. The little boy looked up, his brown eyes filled with a question Ethan could never answer. "Dad, are you sad?" Ben asked, his voice soft, his little hands gripping a crayon tightly. Ethan knelt down, pulling Ben into his arms. "No, buddy. I'm okay." But even as he said it, he felt a sinking feeling that his words were a thin comfort, a veil hiding the cracks that had begun to form in his marriage. Chapter 2, The Separation. Ethan remembered the day Sarah handed him the divorce papers. The world seemed to shift in an instant, his entire life unraveling before his eyes. He didn't know how to react, he felt stunned, hollow. The thought of his family breaking apart terrified him. But nothing scared him more than the idea of losing Ben. They went through the motions, with lawyers and mediators trying to find a way to divide what once had been whole. Sarah was awarded primary custody of Ben, and Ethan felt like the ground had been pulled out from beneath him. He would get to see his son on weekends, maybe a few holidays here and there, but it wasn't enough. How could weekends replace the closeness they once had? How could limited time replace the life he wanted to build with his son? The day they took Ben away was the hardest day of Ethan's life. He stood on the doorstep, watching his little boy clutch a worn-out teddy bear, his eyes wide with confusion. "Where are we going, Dad?" Ben's voice was barely a whisper. Ethan forced a smile, though every part of him was breaking. "You'll be with Mom for a while, buddy. I'll see you soon." Ben's little fingers tightened around Ethan's hand, and the two shared a look of unspoken understanding. But Ethan knew it wasn't goodbye. It couldn't be. As the car pulled away, Ethan stood frozen, his heart feeling as if it had been ripped from his chest. The house was empty. The laughter was gone. And in its place was a silence that weighed on him like a shroud. Chapter 3, A Father's Grief. Days turned into weeks, and each day without Ben was like an endless ache that never eased. Ethan's home felt like a museum, every corner reminded him of his son. The small drawings Ben had stuck to the refrigerator, the toy trucks scattered in his room, even his faint scent still lingered on his pillow. Ethan began his days with a ritual of sorrow. He would go into Ben's empty room each morning, just to feel a sense of closeness, to imagine his son still there. He'd sit on the edge of the bed and close his eyes, willing himself to remember every detail, the warmth of Ben's hugs, the sound of his laughter, the way he'd fall asleep holding his father's thumb. One night, as he sat alone in the darkened room, his heart heavy with longing, Ethan whispered into the silence, "Ben, I miss you more than words. I promise, I'll bring you back." But the road ahead was steep and tangled with legal complexities. Ethan knew he would face an uphill battle to regain custody, but for his son, he would face any hardship. He began looking into legal options, knowing that each decision would demand sacrifices, more money, more time, more of his broken heart. Chapter 4, Fighting to Reunite. Ethan threw himself into work, determined to save every penny he could for the legal fees. He took on extra shifts and side jobs, often working late into the night. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by an endless cycle of working, saving, and longing for his son. When he finally managed to file for partial custody, the legal process proved to be draining. Court hearings tested his patience, his finances, and his emotional strength. Each court date was a whirlwind of paperwork, questions, and counterarguments from Sarah's lawyer. But with every setback, Ethan's resolve grew stronger. He knew that love and persistence were his only weapons. There were days when he thought he couldn't go on. Days when he would sit alone in his empty house, feeling the weight of loneliness crushing his spirit. But then he would remember Ben's smile, the warmth of his small hand in his own, and it would reignite the fire in him to keep fighting. Chapter 5, Hope Rekindled. After months of grueling hearings and countless sacrifices, Ethan finally received a glimmer of hope. His lawyer called him with news that lifted his heart. The judge was considering a custody arrangement that would allow Ethan partial custody. It was a small victory, but to Ethan, it felt monumental. The night before his scheduled reunion with Ben, Ethan could hardly sleep. He paced through the house, his heart racing with anticipation. He made sure everything was perfect. Ben's favorite toys were arranged in his room, and he even prepared a small picnic with all of Ben's favorite snacks. When the day finally came, Ethan stood by his front door, his heart pounding as he waited. And then, he saw his son, stepping out of the car, his small face lighting up as he recognized his father. "Dad!" Ben cried, running toward him. Ethan dropped to his knees, pulling his son into his arms. The embrace felt like coming home, as if all the pain and longing of the past months had melted away in that single moment. "I missed you so much, buddy," Ethan whispered, holding Ben tight, tears streaming down his face. And in that moment, he knew that every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every tear had been worth it. Together, they walked into the house, their bond unbroken, stronger than ever. Ethan knew there would still be challenges ahead, but he also knew that as long as he had Ben by his side, he could face anything. Chapter 6, A New Beginning, A Fragile Hope. The first few weekends with Ben were a whirlwind of joy mixed with the quiet sadness of knowing their time together was limited. Each visit felt like a reminder of everything they had lost, but Ethan was determined to make every moment count. On their first weekend together, they set out for the nearby park. It was a place they had visited often, where they had shared countless moments playing, running, and laughing. As they walked side by side, Ethan noticed how Ben seemed quieter, as if he was trying to piece together the memories that had been interrupted by the separation. "Remember when we used to come here all the time?" Ethan asked, a smile pulling at his lips as he looked down at Ben. Ben nodded, clutching his father's hand a little tighter. "Yeah, Dad, we used to race to the swings." Ethan's heart ached at the way Ben said it, his voice laced with a hint of uncertainty. He realized that his son was trying to protect himself, trying to make sense of the new reality in his young mind. The swings came into view, and with a spark of their old playfulness, Ethan said, "Think you can beat me there?" A grin spread across Ben's face, and he took off running, his laughter breaking through the walls they had both built around their hearts. For a moment, everything felt just as it used to be. After Ben finally grew tired and flopped down in the grass, they lay there together, staring up at the sky, pointing out shapes in the clouds. As they watched the clouds drift, Ethan felt a peace he hadn't felt in months, a fleeting yet powerful reminder of the life he wanted to create with his son. Chapter 7, The Long Goodbye. As each weekend drew to a close, saying goodbye became the hardest part of Ethan's life. He would drive Ben back to Sarah's house, his heart breaking a little more each time he saw his son's face cloud over, trying to hide his sadness as he waved goodbye. One evening, as Ethan knelt beside Ben's car seat, he could see tears gathering in his son's eyes. "Why do I have to go, Dad?" Ben asked, his voice small, his hands twisting together nervously. "Can't I stay with you forever?" Ethan felt the air leave his lungs as he tried to hold back his own tears. "I want that too, buddy," he managed, his voice trembling. "But we'll have next weekend, and I'll be right here, waiting for you." Ben nodded, his little hand reaching out to touch Ethan's cheek. "Promise?" "Promise," Ethan said, pressing a kiss to Ben's forehead, his heart shattering as he closed the car door and watched his son disappear into the night. Every goodbye felt like a piece of himself was being left behind, but he clung to the hope that someday, these goodbyes would be replaced by a permanent hello. Chapter 8: Building a Home. Determined to make his home feel as much like home for Ben as possible, Ethan threw himself into transforming his house. He painted Ben's room in bright colors, hung up posters of superheroes, and filled it with toys and books Ben loved. He wanted his son to feel like he truly belonged there, that this was his space as much as it was his father's. One weekend, Ethan surprised Ben with a small tent set up in the living room, decorated with fairy lights and filled with cozy blankets and pillows. As they lay inside, Ethan told Ben stories about his own childhood, about the adventures he had dreamed up and the games he had played. "You know, when I was little, I dreamed of having a treehouse," Ethan said, smiling as he saw Ben's eyes light up with excitement. "Can we make one?" Ben asked, his eyes wide with hope. "Of course," Ethan replied, knowing he would do anything to make that happen. The idea of building something together, something just for them, filled him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. It was more than just a project, it was a symbol of the life he wanted to build with his son, of the roots he hoped to plant so that Ben would always feel connected, no matter how much time they were forced to spend apart. Chapter 9: The Court's Decision. Months went by, each one bringing Ethan and Ben closer, yet also filled with the unspoken tension of their precarious situation. Ethan had been attending court dates, meetings, and sessions with family counselors, each step a slow crawl toward a decision that could change everything. Finally, the day of the final hearing arrived. Ethan dressed carefully, his heart heavy with hope and fear. He knew he had done everything he could, that he had fought as hard as possible for his son. As he entered the courtroom, he glanced over and saw Ben's little face watching him, his brown eyes wide with trust. Ethan's heart tightened as he smiled at him, silently promising that no matter the outcome, he would always be there. The judge's decision was a mix of joy and sorrow, joint custody, with alternating weekends and holiday breaks. It wasn't the full custody he had hoped for, but it was a start. It was a chance to truly be in Ben's life, to be a constant presence and not just a weekend visitor. As they left the courtroom together, Ben's small hand in his, Ethan felt a surge of relief mixed with sadness. They would still face separations, still endure the painful goodbyes, but at least now they had more time to make memories, to build their bond, to create a life together. Chapter 10: Finding Peace. Over the next few years, Ethan and Ben settled into a rhythm. The shared custody arrangement wasn't easy, but they had found ways to make it work. Every moment they spent together was precious, and Ethan learned to cherish the little things, like Ben's laughter filling the room, the quiet moments spent reading together, the conversations about Ben's day, his dreams, his fears. One autumn evening, as they sat by the fire in their makeshift living room fort, Ben turned to his father with a thoughtful expression. "Dad," he began, his voice soft, "even when I'm not here, I still feel close to you. It's like I carry you with me, in here." He touched his chest, right over his heart. Ethan felt a tear slip down his cheek as he pulled his son close. "Me too, Ben. You're always with me, right here." And as they sat together, father and son, they both understood that their love would transcend any distance, any court ruling, any circumstance. Their bond, though tested and scarred, had become unbreakable. In the end, they had found their way back to each other, proving that love, true, unwavering love, was the greatest strength they could ever hold. Epilogue: A lifetime of love. Years passed, and Ben grew into a young man with his father's resilience and kindness. Through all the challenges, Ethan had remained a steady presence in Ben's life, a source of guidance, love, and support. One day, as they sat together reminiscing, Ben looked over at his father, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Dad, you've always been my hero," he said quietly. "Thank you, for never giving up on me." Ethan wrapped an arm around his son, his heart swelling with pride. "I'd walk through fire for you, Ben. Always." And in that moment, as father and son sat together, the years of struggle faded, leaving only the enduring love that had carried them through it all.